Hey guys, Tyler here. Star Trek the original series, the one that started it all, the classic sci-fi series that aired from 1966 to 1969, TOS was groundbreaking in many ways and has inspired millions with its optimistic vision of the future. It of course went on to spawn an entire franchise that includes movies, spin-off shows, video games, comics, and more. All stuff that veteran subscribers of this channel have heard me talk about ad nauseum. I've reviewed The Next Generation on this channel, and before I move on to Deep Space Nine or any other series, I wanted to discuss TOS's lore contributions, as well as offer my opinions on several of the episodes. It should go without saying that while I intend for this video to be more of a lore analysis and not specifically a review, it will contain spoilers for TOS and other Trek, so if that's something that you care about, you've been warned. Without further ado, let's get started. Before we dive in, a word from today's sponsor, Architects of Fate. Hey, are you looking to build an adventure with friends? Well, I just might have the place for you. Architects of Fate is a Twitch channel that specializes in tabletop RPGs with an emphasis on interactive gameplay and storytelling. All for free. Just by jumping into chat, you can make the lives of the game master and players easier or harder. It's up to you. Not only do Architects of Fate play well-known tabletop RPGs like 5th edition D&D, but they also play less common RPGs like Star Trek, Star Wars, Conan, Aliens, and more, plus totally original games like Solar Patrol, and Bad Horse's Evil League of Evil with a two-headed DM. Architects of Fate even has community game nights with chat. They're always looking for new games to share with each other and invite you to play alongside them. The goal is to make sure every player and viewer gets their chance to contribute and shine. Started in early 2019 by Chief Architect Nat Too Shabby, Architects of Fate continues his family's tradition of tabletop gaming and late-night storytelling by sharing the experience with everyone. So come watch and join a group of players to write new stories and forge new friendships. Architects of Fate can be watched live on Twitch or rewatched on YouTube at the links on screen and in the description below. Big thanks to Architects of Fate for sponsoring this video. Now, back to TOS. The concept for Star Trek the original series emerged from Gene Roddenberry's interest in science fiction dating all the way back to the 1940s. He sold his first sci-fi story to television in 1956 and later went on to produce his first television series, The Lieutenant, for MGM. By 1963, MGM was of the opinion that action-adventure shows would become the next big thing, and were receptive to hearing Roddenberry's ideas for Star Trek, which he had been developing since 1960. However, the studio was not enthusiastic about the concept, prompting Roddenberry to shop his wagon train to the stars with various networks like CBS. By 1964, it was rumored that Desilu was interested in buying a new series, and after multiple rejections from other studios, Roddenberry took his chances with Desilu. This paid off, with Desilu agreeing to a 3-year deal in April 1964. The vice president of programming at NBC had Roddenberry write 3 story outlines, one of which would be turned into a pilot. This resulted in Star Trek's first pilot, The Cage, being selected. Roddenberry recruited many people to help him flesh out his vision of the future, including the Rand Corporation's Harvey P. Lin as science consultant, Pato Guzman as art director, and Matt Jeffries as assistant production designer. Guzman was later replaced by Franz Bacalin. Robert H. Justman was hired as an assistant director for the pilot, having previously worked on The Outer Limits. Makeup artist Fred Phillips was also brought in, his first task to create Spock's ears. After pre-production throughout the summer, The Cage was shot in fall 1964 on Culver Studios stages 14, 15, and 16. Roddenberry convinced Jeffrey Hunter to play Captain Pike, originally named Captain April and later Captain Winter. Leonard Nimoy and Majel Barrett had worked with Roddenberry on The Lieutenant and were cast as Science Officer Spock and Pike's XO, number 1, respectively. Veteran actor John Hoyt was cast as Dr. Phil Boyce, Peter Duria as Jose Tyler, and Laurel Goodwin as Yeoman J.M. Colt. Extras were cast from a diversity of ethnic groups, significant because integration was not a usual occurrence on 1960s television, and racial segregation was still a reality in the United States. While much of the footage from The Cage is reused in the two-part Season 1 episode The Menagerie, TOS's first pilot introduces many core elements of the Trek universe. I'm talking the Enterprise, Star Trek's planetary classification system, transporters, Orions, even Spock and some of the other characters. Captain Christopher Pike calls his first officer, Una Chen Riley, Number 1, a moniker Jean-Luc Picard uses for Commander William Riker in The Next Generation. As many have noted, Spock's portrayal in The Cage is markedly different from his characterization throughout the rest of the series, and most of the franchise for that matter. In The Cage, Spock shows emotion. He smiles and acts human in several ways that matter, his main alien feature being his appearance, like his pointed ears. Indeed, it was Number 1 in The Cage and Roddenberry's original conception of Star Trek who embodied the cold, logical personality. According to Leonard Nimoy, when James T. Kirk replaced Pike as captain of the Enterprise in the second pilot, Nimoy found that William Shatner's exuberant energy enabled him to play Spock as more reserved. Regardless, The Cage, in my opinion, sets the stage quite well for much of what's to come in TOS, even if it didn't actually air until 1988. We meet a Pike who has clearly been in command for years and is even considering resigning, burdened with having to make so many lethal decisions. Weeks before, Pike had led an away team on Rigel 7 that left several crewmen injured and cost 3 lives. This uneasiness with command is echoed in the first episode of Strange New Worlds, and we even get something of a follow-up to this Rigel mission in Strange New Worlds Season 2's Among the Lotus Eaters. But Pike's chief medical officer, Dr. Boyce, talks him out of resigning. Spock informs the captain that the Enterprise has received a distress call from a crashed ship on Talos 4, the SS Columbia, which crash-landed there 18 years ago. As it turns out, this is all an illusion. There's only one survivor of the Columbia, Vina, kept young in appearance by the Talosians, who plan to mate Pike and Vina to rebuild their civilization that was destroyed by a nuclear holocaust. They find that humans have a natural hatred for captivity, and Pike and his crew are released. While The Cage is a well-written episode, in my opinion, there are certain aspects of it that are difficult to reconcile with canon. If you take the dialogue at face value, helmsman Jose Tyler implies that faster-than-light travel is a relatively new phenomenon, saying,
"And you won't believe how fast you can get back. Well, the time barrier's been broken. Our new ships can..."
This is, of course, inconsistent with the fact that even in Metamorphosis, Zephram Cochrane, the inventor of warp drive, is said to have lived centuries before TOS takes place. That said, Tyler's statement is vague enough that, in universe, it could be reasoned that he meant something else. Pike also makes a comment about not being used to women on the bridge, which is rather out of place for Trek's 23rd century setting, and indeed was left out of the menagerie. Spock even makes a reference to the Enterprise possessing chemical rocket propulsion as a backup system, something that is never referenced later on. Plus, like I mentioned, his emotionalism runs contrary to his portrayal throughout most of Trek, but Discovery and Strange New Worlds demonstrate that during the 2250s, he was experimenting a lot more with embracing his human side. So I don't view this as a contradiction, necessarily. In any event, even though The Cage is frequently listed alongside the other episodes of Season 1, its status as a rejected pilot really does make it unique compared to the rest of the franchise. Its vibe is much more surrealist than later Trek, even compared to other TOS episodes. Though, like I said, that doesn't make it bad, just different. While NBC officials liked The Cage, and Desilu executive Herb Solow said they were surprised by how realistic it looked, the pilot was rejected as NBC believed it would only attract a small audience and wanted more action and adventure. They also had problems with Spock's satanic appearance and the presence of a female first officer, because of fucking course, but they still wanted to help make the show a reality. They then made the unprecedented move of ordering a second pilot. Jeffrey Hunter chose not to reprise his role as Pike, mainly on the advice of his wife, who felt Hunter would be typecast in science fiction. Having previously acted in episodes of The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, William Shatner was cast as James Kirk, his middle initial being changed after Where No Man Has Gone Before from R to T. Paul Fix was cast as the Doctor, with Canadian actor James Doohan landing the role of Scotty and Japanese-American actor George Takei as Sulu. Robert Dawn replaced Phillips as head makeup artist, but Phillips returned for the series proper. Academy Award-winning cinematographer Ernest Haller came out of semi-retirement to serve as director of photography, and Justman, in addition to still serving as AD, replaced Outer Limits vet Byron Hasen as a producer. After some updates to these sets and props, Where No Man Has Gone Before was shot on Paramount Stages 9 and 10. The new pilot was accepted by NBC, and a full season was ordered for the 1966-1967 broadcast season. History was made. Where No Man Has Gone Before is, in my opinion, a slightly stronger pilot than The Cage. It's more action-oriented, which provides a good balance to the ultra-cerebral aspects of The Cage, and the script is more compact. Spock works much better as a follower of Vulcan logic as opposed to his portrayal in The Cage, setting up part of the triumvirate of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy that offers some of the best banter in all of Star Trek. Of course, the crew still isn't fully assembled yet. McCoy is not present as CMO, instead replaced by Mark Piper. Uhura is not in Where No Man Has Gone Before, and instead actor Lloyd Haynes plays a communications officer named Alden. Furthermore, Sulu is not at the helm. He instead wears a science blue uniform and works in the astrophysics department. But most of the focus of the episode is on the friendship between Kirk and Lieutenant Gary Mitchell, who upon contact with the Milky Way's galactic barrier has begun to develop a variety of psionic abilities, thanks to his high Esper rating. Oh yeah, Where No Man Has Gone Before establishes that some humans are capable of extrasensory perception. This is a pretty big deal, and when discussing Mitchell's accumulation of power, Elizabeth Daner, another Esper, expresses a level of empathy for what she considers could be
a new and better kind of human being.
But in Mitchell's quest for power, he exposes some of humanity's most savage impulses, undermining his cause and bringing forth his demise at Daner's hands. Fun fact, Mitchell mentions a blonde lab technician that Kirk almost married, which is widely considered, retroactively, to be a reference to Dr. Carol Marcus. After Where No Man Has Gone Before, preparation for the full season began in early 1966. The sets were updated once again, as were the uniforms and the Enterprise model. Shatner and Nimoy were kept as the stars, with Grace Lee Whitney joining as human Janice Rand. Interestingly, Shatner, Nimoy, and Whitney were the three most prominently featured in publicity photos. And indeed, I kind of forgot how much Rand was featured in the first season. Doohan and Takei were also kept, and DeForest Kelley was hired to play the new CMO, Dr. McCoy. Finally, Nichelle Nichols landed the role of Communications Officer Uhura, and, of course, went on to become a symbol of racial and gender diversity in the show. Jerry Finnerman became the new DP, while a cadre of other producers joined as assistants to Justman. Gene L. Kuhn became line producer in August 1966, and also regularly contributed as writer, as did Edward K. Milkis and D.C. Fontana, Roddenberry's former secretary. The Corbomite Maneuver, the first episode produced after Where No Man Has Gone Before, is the first episode of TOS, when viewed in that order, that feels like Star Trek, although there are still a few aspects that haven't been fully realized yet. Uhura is in Command Gold rather than Operations Red, which she won't don until The Enemy Within. But Sulu has been permanently transferred to the bridge, and the Enterprise deals with an unknown scientific threat, as is typical of many of the best self-contained classic Trek storylines. The Corbomite Maneuver introduces the First Federation, a small Alpha Quadrant power with whom the United Federation of Planets later forms a cooperative trade relationship, and the imaginary substance Corbomite, which Kirk uses as part of a bluff against Baylock, is mentioned again in Season 2's The Deadly Years, which was later remade into the Next Generation episode Unnatural Selection. Speaking of episodes remade in TNG, another pops up in TOS Season 1, The Naked Time, in which the Enterprise crew falls victim to polywater intoxication, which lowers their inhibitions. The Naked Time offers an early depiction of the romantic tension between Spock and Nurse Christine Chapel, which is also expounded upon in Strange New Worlds. Spock's emotional breakdown amid the polywater intoxication serves as a major early insight into Spock's struggle to control his emotions, a struggle all Vulcans experience, but one that is of course even more difficult for him given his human half. Kirk also comments on how his commitment to Starfleet precludes his ability to make time for a family, a recurring motif that various other episodes, as well as The Wrath of Khan, flesh out. And The Naked Time introduces a form of time travel stemming from a cold restart of the Enterprise's engines to save its orbit from decaying. Kirk and Spock remark on the novelty of this, and as we'll see, the crew makes use of time travel on a few more occasions. One of these is The City on the Edge of Forever, which is considered by many to be the best episode of the series. After discovering an uninhabited planet housing a time machine called the Guardian of Forever, McCoy, suffering from an accidental overdose of a substance called cordrazine, travels back to 1930 Earth, and Kirk and Spock must retrieve him. Arriving several days ahead of McCoy, Kirk and Spock make the acquaintance of a social worker named Edith Keeler. With 1930s radio equipment, Spock is able to build a computer that can access the information on his tricorder. He and Kirk learn that if Keeler does not die in a car accident on a very specific day, she will go on to found a peace movement that keeps the US out of World War II, allowing the Nazis to win the war, which prevents Starfleet and the Federation from ever existing. Some consider this event to be a possible point of divergence for the Mirror Universe, which I've historically argued against, although one can never be sure. Check out my video about the Mirror Universe's history for more info on that front. Anyway, after McCoy arrives in the past, Kirk stops him from saving Edith, thus restoring the timeline. It's a really poignant episode, and one that is, in my opinion, deserving of all of the praise it gets. It's one of multiple strong episodes in Season 1, and indeed, I actually think that Season 1 contains the highest ratio of good to bad episodes. In addition to The Cage and The Menagerie, Where No Man Has Gone Before, The Corbinite Maneuver, and The City on the Edge of Forever, there's roughly another half dozen episodes from Season 1 that I put in the peak quality category. One is Balance of Terror, which introduces the Romulans and offers some lore on the Earth-Romulan War from the late 22nd century. The episode also suggests that cloaking devices are a relatively new invention known to Federation science, even though later in the prequel series Enterprise and Discovery, Suliban and Klingon cloaks are encountered by Starfleet, possibly a change that is a result of the temporal Cold War. The Galileo 7, which sees some of the crew stranded after a shuttle crash on a dangerous planet, has Spock decree that the logical thing to do would have been to leave him after he was separated from the rest of the landing party. He expresses a similar sentiment in Star Trek Into Darkness after Kirk saves Spock from a volcanic eruption on Nibiru, and Kirk realizes that if the roles were reversed, Spock would have left him behind. The Menagerie sees Spock help Pike return to Talos 4 after he suffers from severe radiation burns. Arena sees the powerful Metrons pit Kirk against a Gorn captain after the Gorn attack the Federation colony at Cestus 3, seeing it as an encroachment upon their territory. It is only after Kirk shows mercy for his injured opponent that the Metrons decide to let both captains live. Sympathy for an initially monstrous creature is also displayed in The Devil in the Dark, which introduces the Horta, and in Errand of Mercy, powerful non-corporeal beings, the Organians, once again intervene in a conflict between the Federation and another space power, namely the Klingons. It also introduces Klingon Commander Kor, who along with Koloth and Kang, goes on to make more appearances in Deep Space Nine. Space Seed, of course, introduces Khan Noonien Singh and the background of the eugenics wars, which nearly plunged Earth into a new dark age in the late 1990s, when an away team beams over to the derelict DY-100 class Botany Bay. Enterprise historian Marla McGivers discusses its nature as an interplanetary sleeper ship. She says that such vessels became obsolete in 2018, which is consistent with what we know about human spaceflight in Star Trek after this date. The way that Kirk and the other human officers talk about Khan is quite noteworthy, as while they abhor his ideology, they admire his ambition. Kirk says,
"He was the best of the tyrants, and the most dangerous."
There were no massacres or wars of aggression under Khan's rule, but there was as little freedom, and his rule over a quarter of Earth's population saw a marked drop in scientific advancement. You see, Khan was an augment, a selectively bred lineage of human designed to be faster, stronger, and more intelligent. Khan defends his existence in contrast to Earth's technical accomplishments, which he claims have still hardly allowed humans to take control of their evolution. This provides some context for the later established ban in the Federation on genetic engineering for fear that it might spark another eugenics war. This is probably what led certain individuals to seek other means to improve humanity, such as Dr. Roger Corby, who perfected a not-so-perfect method of creating androids, as seen in What Are Little Girls Made Of? Khan and his followers are of course deposited on SETI Alpha 5, which is revisited in The Wrath of Khan. Of course, these are not the only episodes of Season 1 that make significant lore contributions. In addition to The Enemy Within, The Naked Time, and What Are Little Girls Made Of, a good bulk of Season 1 I'd put in a middle category when it comes to quality. Not quite reaching the same levels that the best episodes do, but still entertaining and thought-provoking nonetheless. The Man Trap, aired as the first episode of TOS in September 1966, introduces the M113 creature, or salt vampire, which has made a number of other appearances. The episode is also one of a few in early TOS that feature Uhura flirting with Spock, and while a relationship doesn't materialize in the Prime universe, a romance between the two characters is of course established in the alternate reality Star Trek films. Spock also says in the episode that Vulcan has no moon, which is #technically correct, as Vulcan has a sister planet called Takut, which has its own moon. Dagger of the Mind introduces the Vulcan mind meld. The Conscience of the King establishes part of Kirk's backstory as an escapee of the massacre on Tarsus 4 at the hands of Kodos the Executioner, a massacre that also claimed the life of Hoshi Sato. The Federation transport carrying the Caridian Company of Players, the Astral Queen, also served as the inspiration for the name of a prison ship in the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, according to Ronald D. Moore. The Squire of Gothos features Trelane, an adolescent member of a super powerful race that many have compared to early versions of the Q. In Tomorrow is Yesterday, a chance encounter with a black star hurtles the Enterprise back to 1969 Earth, where the ship accidentally becomes visible as a UFO. They beam aboard an inbound Air Force pilot named John Christopher, whose son becomes the commander of the first manned mission to Saturn. Kirk tells Christopher that the Enterprise, one of 12 Constitution-class ships in the fleet, is under the authority of the United Earth Space Probe Agency as a combined service. Voyager later confirms that USPA dates back to at least the 2060s, and Enterprise clarifies that USPA was integrated into Starfleet by the 2130s. Towards the end of the episode, we see the first use of the slingshot effect, and Spock suggests using the transporter to reintegrate Christopher with his past self while the Enterprise is in time warp around the sun. The Return of the Archons introduces Beta 3, where the population acts like zombies and blindly obeys the will of their machine ruler, Landru. The episode also introduces the Prime Directive, Starfleet's non-interference policy. Kirk makes an exception for this culture, which he deems has stagnated, a distinction he also invokes in the Season 2 episode A Private Little War. And Operation Annihilate features James T. Kirk's brother Sam, his wife, as well as one of Sam's children, and introduces the idea of the Vulcan Inner Eyelid. A Taste of Armageddon, which traps the Enterprise crew in the midst of the Eminiar Vendikar War, introduces Federation diplomat Robert Fox, the namesake of one of the ships carrying El-Orion refugees in Star Trek Generations, and is the first episode to feature Scotty in command of the Enterprise. It also establishes General Order 24, which allows a starship to obliterate an entire planet's population. As has been noted, it's never been discussed if General Order 24 was actually a bluff, or if it's really permitted as a retaliatory action, or whether its disproportionate nature is ever discussed by the crew. But this isn't the first time that it's mentioned that the Enterprise is powerful enough to lay waste to an entire planet's population. Court Martial and This Side of Paradise are also pretty good episodes that fill in some other minor details about the Star Trek universe, as does Charlie X, which establishes the Enterprise's crew complement is 428. But Charlie X, along with Mudd's Women, which introduces Harry Mudd, Miri, which features a duplicate of Earth that experienced a horrible plague, and the Alternative Factor, which confirms the existence of an antimatter dimension, highlights one of the major issues lots of people have with the original series, namely its campiness. Now, almost every episode of the original series has some camp in it, like instances where William Shatner or somebody else overacts, but for the most part, TOS Season 1 has some of the strongest writing in the show. TOS Season 2 introduces some other iconic elements of Star Trek, including Ensign Pavel Chekhov, who by the third episode, Friday's Child, is firmly established as the Enterprise's primary navigator. He has a prominent role and opportunity for romance in The Apple, in which the Enterprise encounters a civilization on Gamma Trianguli 6 that worships a machine god called Vol. Chekhov and Uhura get a chance to accompany Kirk on an away mission in the Gamesters of Triskelion, which pits the crew against other aliens for the entertainment of the providers, ancient brains and vats. Scotty is given the spotlight in Wolf in the Fold, in which he is accused of murders later revealed to be the work of the non-corporeal entity Red Jack. Friday's Child and The Apple establish Scotty as a second officer and give more screen time to him in command, as does Bread and Circuses, in which the crew encounters a planet where the Roman Empire never fell. That's actually a recurring motif in Season 2, more so than Season 1. The Enterprise finds lots of planets with cultures patterned after Earth history, whether by coincidence or human interference. While I think Bread and Circuses is entertaining enough, even better stories of this variety, in my opinion, can be found in A Piece of the Action and Patterns of Force, featuring cultures based on Chicago mobsters and Nazi Germany, respectively. A much more cringeworthy episode with such a premise is The Omega Glory, often ranked as one of the worst episodes of TOS. This episode features two sides of a planet-wide war, the Yangs and the Combs, patterned after America and Asia, respectively. But while the Yangs are portrayed as noble savages, the Combs are still depicted as oppressive, which various writers have noted fails to deconstruct Cold War stereotypes of Asian people. There's also the ending, in which Kirk preaches about the merits of the US Constitution, and while this is not the most objectionable part to me, it's so obviously shoehorned in. Patterns of Force is hardly flawless either, as Federation historian John Gill, who has violated the Prime Directive to establish a totalitarian regime on Ecos, describes Nazi Germany as the most efficient state in Earth history. Gill is clearly off his rocker, but Spock agrees, deciding how radically Germany was able to turn its luck around from being defeated in World War I to bordering on global domination. Except, to describe the Nazis as efficient is ahistorical. It ignores all of the inefficiencies that plague authoritarian regimes and just runs contrary to historical consensus. But Roddenberry's proclivity for inserting political parables, a staple of classic Star Trek, takes other forms as well. Two episodes present somewhat contradictory commentaries on the Vietnam War. One of them is The Omega Glory, which, to its credit, does have Kirk tell the Yangs that the values of liberty and freedom apply to their enemies as well. But in an episode that was produced and aired weeks before, A Private Little War, in which the Klingons provide a Stone Age society with advanced weaponry, Kirk lectures Bones about the need for a balance of power. A Private Little War, which takes place on the planet Neural, is one of two appearances in TOS of Dr. Joseph Mbinga, a regular in Strange New Worlds, and also introduces the notorious ape-like Mugato. Klingons prominently feature as well in one of the most memorable episodes of the original series overall, The Trouble with Tribbles, which of course introduces the Tribbles. And William Campbell, who played Trelane in The Squire of Gothos, plays Klingon Commander Koloth. This episode is of course revisited in Deep Space Nine when the Defiant crew travels back in time to stop a plot against James Kirk's life. We also see various aspects of the Federation fleshed out in various top-tier Season 2 episodes like Amok Time and Journey to Babel. Amok Time depicts the Enterprise's first visit to Vulcan as Spock undergoes Pon farr, and introduces T'Pring, Spock's betrothed, who ultimately rejects him by invoking a Vulcan combat ritual. We also meet T'Pau, a younger version of whom is later seen in the fantastic Enterprise 3-part episode The Forge, Awakening, and Kirshara. And of course, T'Pring is in multiple episodes of Strange New Worlds. Journey to Babel, of course, marks the first on-screen appearance of Spock's father Sarek, and introduces core Federation member races like the Andorians and Tellarites. A diverse group of aliens is gathered for the Babel Conference to discuss the admission to the Federation of Corridon, a planet whose people we ultimately meet in Enterprise. Spock's decision not to attend the Vulcan Science Academy in favor of attending Starfleet Academy is also depicted in the 2009 Star Trek film. The, in my opinion, underrated Obsession, in which Kirk seeks to hunt down a monstrous cloud creature he failed to destroy years ago, offers some insight into his early Starfleet career and service aboard the USS Farragut. A number of surprising encounters in Season 2 include meeting Zefram Cochrane, inventor of warp drive and metamorphosis, the Greek god Apollo in Who Mourns for Adonais, and yes, that's how it's pronounced, and a giant space amoeba in the Immunity Syndrome, which marks the first reference to a Starfleet ship, the Intrepid, that is crewed entirely by Vulcans. More spaceborne threats of an artificial variety rear their heads in multiple episodes too. In the Doomsday Machine, the crew discovers a massive planet killer of likely extragalactic origin, and Commodore Matt Decker, who production sources indicate was intended to be the father of Will Decker, jeopardizes the ship in an attempt to avenge his own fallen crew. The Changeling sees the Enterprise encounter Nomad, an Earth probe that later became augmented upon contact with an alien intelligence, a similar plot to the motion picture. Such dangers of artificial intelligence are also front and center in The Ultimate Computer, which sees the Enterprise host a demonstration of the M5 Multitronic unit, created by Richard Daystrom, namesake of the Daystrom Institute, and AI's shortcomings are demonstrated as well in I, Mudd, the second appearance of Harry Mudd, who has fled to an uncharted planet populated by androids. These androids' makers, who are from the Andromeda Galaxy, are explicitly described as being non-humanoid, which is in accordance to the oft-stated idea in the series that humanoid life is rare even within the Milky Way galaxy itself. Other aliens from Andromeda, the Kelvins, take human form and hijack the Enterprise in By Any Other Name. And an even more surprising encounter happens in Cat's Paw, when the Enterprise uncovers extragalactic bird-like aliens who have also taken human form and projected illusions of witches, black cats, and a haunted castle. But the suggestion that ancient humanoids populated various planets in the galaxy underpins the episode Return to Tomorrow, as the crew meets remaining members of the Oretian civilization, which may have influenced the evolution of the Vulcan species. Return to Tomorrow also features Diana Muldaur as Dr. Ann Mulhall, 20 years before she joined the cast of The Next Generation as Dr. Catherine Pulaski. Mirror Mirror introduces the Mirror Universe and Terran Empire, which subsequent Trek shows have fleshed out in more detail. And finally, the Season 2 episode Assignment Earth is the only instance in Star Trek where time travel is treated as routine, with the Enterprise traveling back to 1968 for research purposes. They encounter Gary Seven, member of a group of humans abducted from Earth 4,000 years ago by an alien race from a distant part of the galaxy, and trained as supervisors to monitor Earth's technological and cultural development. As Memory Alpha notes, the Enterprise's routine visit to 1968 seems to indicate that the temporal prime directive is not in force yet, even though it is referred to in the Strange New Worlds episode Those Old Scientists, set 9 years before TOS Season 2, further demonstrating the apparent discontinuity between TOS and the post-temporal Cold War Prime universe depicted in later Trek. Overall, like I alluded to earlier, I still think that Season 1 contains a higher ratio of strong to weak episodes, but Season 2 is pretty strong as well. My favorite episodes from this season are, in no particular order, Amok Time, The Doomsday Machine, The Trouble with Tribbles, Journey to Babel, Obsession, The Immunity Syndrome, and The Ultimate Computer. And ones that don't work as well for me are Cat's Paw, Friday's Child, Who Mourns for Adonais, I Mud, A Private Little War, The Gamesters of Triskelion, and The Omega Glory, with the rest in between. But none of these are unwatchable by any means. And in particular, I Mud is the better of the two Harry Mudd episodes in the original series. Yet, as many have noted, Season 3 is kind of where TOS started to go off the rails, and there's some very specific reasons for that. With TOS having narrowly avoided cancellation after Season 2 thanks to a letter-writing campaign by fans, Season 3 retains mostly the same basic format from the previous season. Many episodes continue to serve as political parables, such as Day of the Dove, in which the Enterprise crew and the crew of a Klingon vessel are pitted against each other by the non-corporeal Beta-12A entity. The episode introduces the Klingon character Kang and carries a strong anti-war message and something of a reversal from Kirk's attitude in A Private Little War. Something else I didn't notice in Day of the Dove until my most recent rewatch is that we get a little insight into the Klingon Empire's motivations for imperial expansion, which is to acquire resources that are scarce in their home system. Much like with the Cardassian Union in the TNG era, this tidbit offers a little perspective on many of the Empire's actions. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield is memorable for its depiction of racial hatred and ends with the Enterprise unable to dissuade the two survivors of a dying civilization from continuing their bitter feud. And of course, there's Plato's Stepchildren, which introduces the telekinetic Platonians, who visited Earth during antiquity and forced the Enterprise crew to do a lot of things. Plato's Stepchildren may not have featured television's first interracial kiss, but it was still significant enough to be banned in multiple states. Kirk also falls in love with an android in Requiem for Methuselah, one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek, which introduces the character Flint the Immortal. But Kirk has one of his most significant romances in The Paradise Syndrome, in which he spends 3 months stranded on the planet Amerind, falling in love with and marrying a woman named Miramani. We find out that the people of Amerind were apparently transplanted there centuries ago by a race called the Preservers. Spock is tasked with deducing the symbols on a preserver obelisk that acts as a powerful asteroid deflector. The task was originally expected by the native population to be performed by Kirk, who has adopted the persona Kirok after the onset of amnesia, but Kirk's inability to do so leads him and Miramani to be stoned. Kirk survives the stoning, but Miramani, who is pregnant, suffers fatal internal injuries. While this episode's depiction of Native Americans has widely been criticized for playing into the noble savage stereotype, and Miramani is portrayed as not being terribly bright, I still look back on this episode with some fascination about the lore surrounding the Preservers. Later media, both canon and non-canon, have fleshed out the concept of an ancient humanoid race that intervened in the early evolution of many intelligent species in Trek's Milky Way. One of the most prominent examples is the progenitor race, who 4.5 billion years ago seeded the primordial oceans of countless M-class worlds with their genetic code, possibly making use of the mycelial network.
The mycelial network is like
mycelial network! Ronald D. Moore has speculated that the preservers and progenitors could be the same species, although the gigantic time discrepancy is kind of a hard pill to swallow, but this is the explanation used by Star Trek Online. Other stories draw a connection with Sargon's people from Return to Tomorrow, whose empire existed about 600,000 years ago. And indeed, in the episode, Spock does point out that the symbols on the obelisk are akin to musical notes that form an alphabet, a style of writing used by certain Vulcan offshoots. Spock attracts female attention in a number of episodes this season, Federation, one of the most notable being the Enterprise incident, which features Joanne Linville as a Romulan commander and establishes that the Romulans are now using Klingon ship designs, pointing to a Klingon-Romulan alliance against the Federation. Spock also has romantic encounters in The Cloudminders, which features a Federation member world called Ardana with a caste society, and All Our Yesterdays, probably the best episode of Season 3, in which Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are trapped in the past of the planet Sarpedon, whose sun Beta Niobe goes supernova. McCoy and Scott also find love in, respectively, For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky, featuring the Fabrini civilization and the asteroid ship Yonada that is on a collision course with the Federation world Darren 5, in The Lights of Zatar, which introduces the library planetoid Memory Alpha, namesake of the canon Star Trek wiki site. Chekhov has significant roles in Spectre of the Gun, which introduces the Melkotians, and The Way to Eden, featuring a band of space hippies. Sulu is given a chance to command the Enterprise in the infamous Spock's Brain for the first time since Errand of Mercy, and accompanies Kirk and McCoy on an away team in the episode That Which Survives, which takes place on an outpost of the extinct Kalandan civilization. The Tholian Web introduces the Tholians as well as the USS Defiant, whose loss in so-called interphase space is tied in with the Mirror Universe by the Enterprise episode In a Mirror Darkly. Spock also makes a comment that there is absolutely no record of a mutiny on a Starfleet ship, which is contradicted by Michael Burnham's mutiny and court-martial in Star Trek Discovery, although she is later pardoned and her record expunged. It's also worth noting that members of the Enterprise crew technically mutiny in earlier episodes like The Menagerie and This Side of Paradise. And we learn in the episode Whom Gods Destroy that the crew of Captain Garth of Izar, who commanded Federation forces at the Battle of Axanar, mutinied against him as well. By the way, exactly whom Garth defeated at Izar has never been revealed in canon, though the original script for the DS9 episode Valiant would have had Nog confirm it was the Klingons. And part of the build-up to this battle is depicted in the brilliant fan short Prelude to Axanar. Overall, as I alluded to earlier, Season 3 contains a higher proportion of weaker episodes than the previous seasons. One of the chief reasons for this has to do with NBC's battle with Roddenberry over the show's time slot. Roddenberry was originally promised an early evening time slot of Mondays at 7:30 p.m., but this would have required NBC to move their top-rated series Laugh-In from 8 to 8:30. This led Laugh-In producer George Shalter to threaten to take his show to another network. NBC capitulated, forcing Star Trek to air in the only remaining slot on the schedule, Fridays at 10 p.m. That's right, the Friday night death slot. Roddenberry then threatened to take Trek to another network unless he was promised Mondays at 7:30, but NBC rejected the threats due to the show's low ratings. Roddenberry kept the post of executive producer for Season 3, but he actually did leave for MGM to pursue other projects. As a consequence, scripts were no longer revised by him, nor by Gene Kuhn or DC Fontana, who had left the series earlier. Because of this, script quality is widely considered to have suffered immensely, and I have to concur with that. Season 3 has quite a few of what I'd call stinkers. Now, mind you, we're still talking about Star Trek, so it's still higher brow than a lot of the schlock you'd find on television in any decade, but Season 3 just isn't the same. While I consider the Enterprise incident, the Tholian Web, and All Our Yesterdays to retain much of the peak writing quality of the previous seasons, much of Season 3 takes Trek's camp and turns it up to 11. Absolutely trash episodes like Spock's Brain, which at least still has some entertainment value, are accompanied by, in my opinion, unwatchable outings like And the Children Shall Lead and The Way to Eden. Then there's a cadre of episodes that are simply forgettable like Spectre of the Gun, The Empath, Wink of an Eye, That Which Survives, and The Lights of Zadar. At least the Mark of Gideon and the Cloudminders have some semblance of a commentary about overpopulation and classism, but are overall rather mediocre, while the more interesting The Savage Curtain is at least memorable for introducing the father of Vulcan logic, Surak, 21st century despotic Earth militia leader Colonel Philip Green, and founder of the Klingon Empire, Kahless the Unforgettable. I do think, though, that Day of the Dove and Let That Be Your Last Battlefield are strong enough for their political allegories, even if the latter's is extremely obvious. For the World is Hollow, Plato's stepchildren and Whom Gods Destroy mainly commit the crime of being overly campy. And then there's Turnabout Intruder, in which a bitter former lover of Kirk's, Dr. Janice Lester, switches bodies with Kirk to live out her fantasy of being a starship captain. You see, she says,
"Your world of starship captains doesn't admit women."
But many fans have interpreted this comment to be about how being a starship captain doesn't leave a lot of time to have a family, rather than women being actually barred from service. Since we of course see Captain Erica Hernandez of the NX-02 Columbia in Enterprise, and Philippa Georgiou of the Shinzo in Discovery. I actually rate Is There in Truth No Beauty, which features Diana Muldaur again and introduces the non-humanoid Medusan species, higher than most, and A Line of Troyes is passable too. But Turnabout Intruder being the series finale certainly didn't help. I was originally going to make a separate video about the animated series, but to be honest with you guys, I don't think it's very good. The show does make some noteworthy lore contributions, so I thought I'd at least talk about it a little bit, along with some background. After TOS experienced a resurgence in popularity and syndication, NBC realized they'd kind of really screwed up by canceling the show in the first place. However, they'd scrapped or sold most of the production assets, of course, meaning revitalizing the show in live action would be too cost prohibitive. Thus, the animated series was born. In my view, though, there are really only 2 episodes of the animated series that I think are worth watching. The first being Yesteryear, in which Spock uses the Guardian of Forever to save himself from being killed as a child in Vulcan's forge, and the Slaver Weapon, which introduces the cat-like Kzinti, whom I made a video about along with the Caitians last year. Link in the description. By the way, this was the first Star Trek video on my channel edited by my magnificent editor Tim. I also kind of like How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth, which introduces the alien Kukulkan who visited Earth in the ancient past and... This episode is basically just Who Mourns for Adonais again, isn't it? Well, it's got some wonderful animation in it, and Trexpertise has an interview on his channel with the writer of this episode, Russell Bates. Uhura gets to be a badass and sees command of the Enterprise in the Lorelei signal, which is otherwise a pretty poor episode. And a lot of fans also rate the series finale, The Counterclock Incident, which introduces former Enterprise Captain Robert April, quite highly, but I just don't get the appeal. The logic of the time-reversed parallel reality they visit is so mind-bogglingly god-awful that it just takes me out of the episode. It's enough to make the animated series feel like it's not canon. Actually, in 1988, the animated series was officially removed from canon at the behest of Gene Roddenberry, with the exception of some parts involving Spock's youth. Indeed, Yesteryear has always been considered at least semi-canon by much of the production staff of Star Trek, with many elements like the city of Shakar, Vulcan's Forge, the Salot, and more being referenced in feature canon installments. Despite Roddenberry's request, though, Memory Alpha recognizes TAS as a valid source of information, and StarTrek.com considers it to have been added back to canon as of 2006. And besides Yesteryear, other canon productions have incorporated callbacks to the animated series as fun nods. Star Trek VI canonized Kirk's middle name, Tiberius. In DS9, Kor mentions the vessel he commands in the TAS episode The Time Trap, the IKS Klothos. DS9 references fauna from the Edosian homeworld, an homage to Lieutenant Eric's. The Rec Room from The Practical Joker serves as the basis for the holodeck in TNG and the holographic battle simulator in Discovery. The act of entering warp nacelles later appears in TNG and Enterprise. Caitians are brought into live action in Star Trek IV. Ship classes from the animated series have been incorporated into the remastered versions of multiple TOS episodes. Robert April has been featured in multiple episodes of Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks, in addition to showing the skeleton of Spock 2 from the TAS episode The Infinite Vulcan, has featured several alien species first introduced in TAS like Caitians, Aurelians, Vendorians, Edosians, and Kzinti, as well as Kukulkan and a member of EM3 green species. By the way, there's a popular myth that the reason there's so much pink in the animated series is because director Hal Sutherland was colorblind. While Sutherland was in fact colorblind, Irv Kaplan, who was in charge of choosing paint colors, was not, and was very conscious of the colors he selected. TAS also makes quite a few unfortunate visual continuity errors, and in fact, one of them that was fortunately caught before one episode aired was Uhura accidentally being painted with Nurse Chapel's colors, turning her white. Yikes. In any event though, while several aspects of the animated series were foundational to later Trek, I personally do find large swaths of it to be hard to reconcile with the rest of canon. I mean, hell, in one episode they randomly travel to the center of the galaxy. Like, no, the show's own rules make that impractical in the 23rd century, and you can bet I reserve that same criticism for Star Trek V.
What does God need with a starship?
But I do respect what TAS represented, a return of Star Trek to television, and what it means to a lot of people. I'm not even mad that Lower Decks makes so many references to it, because why not? Use the animation to your advantage and show off more of those non-humanoid aliens. I hope you enjoyed this stroll down memory lane, and now for the moment that all of you have been waiting for. Okay, maybe not, but where do I put TOS in my ranking of the other Trek series? Well, historically I've said that it's my third favorite behind TNG and DS9. While I do think that TNG has more episodes in its early seasons that I'd consider unwatchable, as a ratio of strong to weak episodes, I think TOS and TNG are rather competitive. So maybe tied for second? We'll see how this changes as I review the other shows. And keep your eyes peeled for a video about the TOS movies coming very soon. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/OrangeRiver, link in the description, or become a YouTube member by clicking the join button on my channel page. I just want to give a quick shout out to all of my donors who allow me to bring on outside talent like editors to make more high quality content for you to enjoy. By becoming a patron or member, you also get access to awesome perks like behind the scenes photos and videos, patron and member only polls, name in the credits, merch discounts, and more. Or you can drop a one-time super thanks or PayPal donation. All are appreciated. Links to my PayPal, as well as my social media and merch store, are in the description too. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.